welcome to the Renaissance History Podcast, brought to you by the Digital Ren Faire. I'm Jonathan Crocker, and I'm sitting here with a couple of my oldest friends from the Renaissance Fair world.
Sure. My name is Lloyd Brant, one half of Theatre of Fools.
And my name is Rosie Cole, and I'm the other half of Theatre of Fools.
And Theatre of Fools has existed as an act at Renaissance festivals since when?
The early 80s. 84 is when Rosie and I started working together.
Yes.
Wow, and where was that?
The Minnesota Renaissance Festival.
And you were involved in the Renaissance Festival a little bit longer than that, as I understand.
I've been performing at the Minnesota Renaissance Festival uninterrupted since 1976, including COVID, which I did work. It's been 47 seasons I've been performing.
What got you into the Renaissance Festival in the first place?
I auditioned for it in 1976. I had learned how to juggle and unicycle at my high school alma mater, St. Paul Open School, and I thought, audition for it.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in 1976, I was living with my best friend from high school, Ted Persig. His father had just published his book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I decided when I was living there, I was going to audition for the Renaissance Festival. I got the role.
So I'm just curious, what was the street rap of the Renaissance Festival at that time? What had you heard? What did you know about what you were getting into?
Oh, gee. Well, my mother and father first told me about the Renaissance Festival the very first year. Mm-hmm. And they invited all 3 of their teenage kids to accompany them to the Renaissance Festival back in, I guess it was 1971. Mm-hmm. And all of us thought whatever the parents were doing had to be completely square. And none of us went. And they came home after that first, year, historic really. And I remember my mother looked directly in my eyes and she said, "You would have loved that." And I didn't ever go until about 5 years later when I went as a patron. And oh my God, I just had to do it. So then I auditioned the next year.
Gotcha.
And I got the in, and I remember setting up my tent behind what was called a hobbit hole. I had no idea what a hobbit hole was. I had no idea what a hobbit was, and it was all new to me. And I performed that weekend, and I came home and I asked Ted, my roommate, "What's a hobbit, Ted?" And he handed me the first of the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, and I read all 3 books cover to cover that next week. And I came back with this sense of real magic. Yeah. It just sort of, the whole Renaissance Festival sort of glowed with a sense of magic after that. And it was a big part of my sense of wonder and how you actually create wonder, create magic. Was that first year and waking up behind, right there. Listening to music in the hobbit hole at night, and then getting up and doing shows. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Great. And Rosie, had you heard of Renaissance festivals before you?
I don't believe so. No, I try to think that I may have heard at some point in my life, because I grew up outside New York City, that there had been a Renaissance festival up in Sterling Forest somewhere, mm-hmm. which it would be Tuxedo, New York. But I had been to Tuxedo, New York before, and had not attended that festival. So I think I heard about it sometime in my 20s, but I had met Lloyd at a School for Mime and Movements Theater, which was called the Valley Studio in Wisconsin. And then he told me that he was working at what was called the Renaissance Festival, but I'd never heard really much about it. So I first really attended a Renaissance Festival when I was visiting Lloyd when he was doing his solo show.
I see.
And I was able to sneak in, which is very rare. I know, right? We went to this gate and we walked through as though we belonged there. And someone said, hey, what are you doing? And so we said, well, we're looking for Lloyd Brant. And it happened to be a friend of Lloyd's. And she looked in the distance. She said, oh, there goes a unicorn. And letting us just slip in. Yeah. And so we went and we found him. We watched him perform his solo clown show. And then we were driving out west, so then we continued onward. And it wasn't until, I don't know, 3 years later that I moved to Minneapolis, planning to work with Lloyd. And we formed a show eventually and joined forces. And then I started in '84. And we had a 2-person show, and it's history after that.
Yeah. And you've worked other festivals, and I know for a fact, but among those are, where else have you worked?
Well, let's see.
Oh boy.
We could start.
First we did Colorado.
That was the first show we did after the Minnesota Renaissance.
And then we did Scarborough Fair.
Scarborough Fair.
And then
Bay Area Renaissance Festival.
Bay Area Renaissance Festival. Arizona Renaissance Festival. Carolina Renaissance Festival. Eventually the Tuxedo, New York Renaissance Festival.
Yeah, we went there.
Sterling, New York Renaissance Festival.
The Great Lakes Medieval Fair. The northern one.
Yeah. The Southern Ohio show we did
Right.
in 2019.
And the northern one. We've done Florida Renaissance Festival.
Several in Florida.
Sarasota Renaissance Festival.
Bay Area Renaissance Festival and Florida Renaissance Festival in outside of Fort Lauderdale. Oh yeah, we're at
the Texas Renaissance Festival.
We'll let the fans call you out on that if you forgot something.
Oh yes! Hey, we saw you in Africa.
Yeah, but put it in the comments if they missed any of their big gigs.
Iowa.
We did.
You did
And West Virginia is actually our new favorite show.
Oh, great! Well, it got good press in the last podcast.
Fantastic
earlier
show.
podcast. Yeah. Well, good. So, what have you noticed in terms of the either geographical or chronological development of Renaissance festivals? Because you have a wide experience here. Is there any general or specific observation that you would make about how things have changed or remained the same? Or
Well, I would say first of all, Minnesota Renaissance was the first Renaissance festival that was a commercial success outside of California. Mm-hmm. There's a history, very early 60s, of the very first Renaissance festivals in North America, in California.
Right.
Minnesota was the first outside of that. That was very early on in my career, when it was just, 3 or 4 Renaissance festivals, period. And now there's a major Renaissance festival outside of almost every major metropolitan area in the country. All the big cities.
And there's more work.
You can perform almost year-round at Renaissance festivals. It's just a short break during the winter holiday seasons. Otherwise, there's a Renaissance festival somewhere in the country.
Right.
Do you keep track of how many weeks you work in a year at Renaissance festivals? How many you have? Do you have
Well, the most we ever did in the day was 5 Renaissance festivals, full Renaissance festivals, which is almost 9 months of work. So
Right.
Now we're doing, about 6-7 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's about right for us.
Right.
Half the year at Renaissance festivals.
Did you ever bump up against burnout with doing a lot of shows in a row?
Yeah, we did. Back in we left the circuit for about 10 years.
Except for the Minnesota Fair.
We always kept the Minnesota show.
Because it's in our city, in our state.
Right.
And just a short drive from our home to the show, and so we didn't have to be on the road to do it. And we stayed home in Minnesota because there was a lot of opportunities to get funding through the Minnesota State Arts Board starting in 2008. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we did from 2008 for about 10 years, yeah.
And focused on indoor theater, and then just kept the summers for doing Renaissance festivals, which was nice too. And
raised a family.
Yeah, and we raised our children on the road, and also they went to school in Minneapolis as well, and went through college and are full adults and on their own, and now we're able to go back and perform as much as we want on the road.
Yeah.
I thought of something sort of idiosyncratic about Ren Faire, so I thought about that's very different, is that when we started, there weren't a lot of people with trailers. That there weren't a lot of people living full-time on the road with some kind of an RV and trailer. And I remember that we were in Colorado, we were living in a tent, and our daughter was a baby. And we started to really kind of wish we had an RV. And you'd look and a handful of people had RVs and trailers. buses. That would mean school buses, buses that were converted into living spaces, motorhomes, and trailers. There was less of them. And now, when you go to a Renaissance festival many years later, now there's a campground full of everybody in RVs.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is nice. That means that people are able to afford them and make a viable living on the road, and then have their home with them.
Yeah, it's amazing how we were back when we were young. We were comfortable living in a tent.
Very comfortable.
Almost full time, living on the road in a tent. It
Until
ended quickly when we
when the
became
baby,
parents.
yeah, when
Yeah.
that
It was hard to find a place in the dirt to put your 1-year-old baby down.
Right.
So we quickly bought a trailer. But that's one of the changes. And the other changes is that there weren't a lot of variety acts with women in them. So I felt that I was part of the minority.
You mainly performed with men.
Yeah, I would be backstage with mostly men that were jugglers and sword swallowers. And the women that were with me, alongside me, were either dancers, actors playing in the royal court, sometimes street characters, and a lot of musicians, singers, and musicians on the street, and then on stages. But as far as variety goes, in the circus arts, which weren't really even as prevalent then, but people were mostly juggling. There was very few women. Yeah, I was just
Did
around
you
guys.
feel your sort of mantle as a pathfinder, as a pioneer, or
Well-
how did you feel that at the time?
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard not to have females with me. It's a very different feeling.
Sure.
And sometimes I felt lonely for that. But then I made friends with the women that were singing or dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And
But the backstage culture was very male dominated.
Yeah, talk more about it. I don't share a stage typically. That's interesting. It's a different aspect of having a mud stage. It's usually dedicated to us. So this the backstage culture is something
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in. How would you characterize that?
It's always been, you're so close with everyone, and you all, band together and help each other. And it was very gender specific of that I was a minority. Mm-hmm. But that was, I'm not sure why, but I have to say that there were women that I'm still close with that were singing. If there was a singing act, usually, women were mostly the singers. And then, as I would say, there was a couple of women that I was with that were trained in something physical like juggling. Sometimes assisting a magician. No acrobats. I can't remember any acrobats.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see. In fact, when we were in West Virginia, I was the only man on the stage. And in fact, here in
New
the show
York's
we're
the
doing
same.
in New York right now, I'm the only man on the stage.
It's about time.
It is, and that's
big
the
change, big
complete
reversal.
reverse. Yeah,
Right.
complete reverse.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
I wanted to share a story. The other woman that was a stage act was working with her husband as well, the Cliff and Mary show, and we shared a stage. You were talking about sharing stages. We shared a stage together when both of our had children, and they were both not
Infants, very
like infants.
small.
I'm like less than 2 months old.
They were very little,
really,
yeah.
really young. And when Cliff and Mary were on stage, we would be taking care of their baby, and when we were on stage, Cliff and Mary would be taking care of Liza, our child. And by the end of that run, Rosie had nursed their child, and Mary had nursed our child, and so we had. That was an extraordinary experience.
There was a lot of carrying of babies backstage. If I have some pictures of it looking backstage, and Cliff's got one baby, Mary's got one, and we're all like rocking the babies, hoping that show would end soon so that we could come, and Mama could come back.
No, it was an extraordinary.
It was great.
What can you say more about raising children on the road?
Oh, I thought it was wonderful.
Me too.
And I think both our son Gabe and our daughter Liza just really have fond memories. That life on the road. When we were home, they would be in school. Mm-hmm. They were at a Waldorf school, but on the road, we would have to homeschool, and there would be There was a great homeschool program that
Teacher Jenny
Jenny
taught the kids. She was instrumental
Still
in
is,
teaching them both
yeah.
to read, and she's been a positive force in helping children be literate. That's a big strength of hers, is that, and that was really nice. And there was a community. There was always a community of kids together, and they would play, and we would have a babysitter. We would employ a babysitter, and when Liza was little, there was a gaggle of kids. I remember she was in a gaggle of kids with a babysitter, and when Gabe was little, we would have a woman, two kids to one person, so they'd walk around all day, and I think they had a great time. A lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm. And then Gabe learned how to ride the unicycle, and he was old enough to just kind of be in charge of himself, and he would ride his unicycle all around the Renaissance Festival.
Do you remember that time?
I do.
It was really great.
And he was
in Arizona in particular.
In Arizona in particular.
And there's a community, and everybody knows your kid.
Yeah.
So when they pass the booth, it's like, I saw Gabe, I got, and they see your kid, and
he's good. He's good.
He's good. He's fine. Did you see him? Yeah, I saw him. And even if they were trying to do something that maybe they weren't supposed to do, something like climb a tree or whatever, everyone would see it and report back, or there's no privacy really. The kids are seen by everyone. So.
Right. It's sort of an ideal combination of great freedom and no privacy.
And it's that story. It takes a child. It takes a village to raise a child. I mean, it was the people looked out for each other. Even when Liza was old enough to start dating, and she started dating who became her husband. When they first started dating, there would be a whole, line of friends looking in on Andrew, how are you doing? I'd like to introduce myself.
I've known this woman for many a year now, and reporting back to us. I met the boyfriend, and I approve. It's a small town, very sweet.
Yeah, it's very sweet. Supportive. It's like a village, like a tribal village.
Yeah. So they met. They are both second generation.
They are both
Renaissance
generation Renaissance participants. Yeah. Liza's husband is the son of a shoemaker. Native Earth is the name of their company, and
they do fairs. They did fairs, and both Liza and Andrew are not on the road, but they both grew up doing them, so they have that in common, which is nice.
Yeah,
kind of like a small town. You meet someone from a small town. Is the way I like to look at it.
I started as a white-faced mime back in the 70s. I was really deeply influenced by the people who were my contemporaries at that time, also performing. My first year, Penn and Teller were both performers, having separate shows, solo shows, but performing at the same festival, and to see their
Penn and Teller.
Penn and Teller. They had separate shows, solo shows. I saw them each, and they were my inspiration. Avner the Eccentric started Renaissance festivals the same year I started, 1976.
Who became the Jewel of the Nile?
Who became the Jewel of the Nile in that Hollywood movie. And then also in that same movie, the Flying Karamazov brothers they came the second year.
Yeah, what were the qualities about those acts that were different than what you'd seen before?
I had never seen anything like that before. I mean, you see Penn and Teller.
So what's the before and after picture of the snapshot of the Renaissance Festival in your mind?
Well, that was the
first thing you did.
That was the first experience to see Penn and Teller, and to see Avner, and that was the example, very smart, very intelligent, witty humor. There was no joust. There was no joust when I started. There was where the joust is. There was a racetrack, and they had ponies hooked up to chariots with rubber wheels.
In Minnesota,
they had chariot races, and it looked silly because they had like crash helmets, plastic crash helmets. They had little flimsy capes that they wore, and blue jeans, and they were in these chariots with rubber tire wheels. And it was the most dangerous thing that you could possibly imagine. No, I never saw anybody get hurt, but it was really dangerous. But there was no joust. So there was no, major sporting kind of event that had the draw that the joust be. So the stage acts like Penn and Teller and the Flying Karamazov brothers, that was the giant draws. Mm-hmm. It completely changed, I have to say, when the joust became the central two at a Renaissance festival. The spectacle. Then the personality of the audience changed. At the time we called it the all-star wrestling mentality. Early on at the Minnesota Renaissance, the same people that would go to the Guthrie Theater would come to the Renaissance Festival. So it was a very...
The arts crowd.
The arts crowd. And it wasn't, and it didn't stay that way.
Right, which is honestly a smaller crowd than the sports crowd.
Much smaller. Oh, absolutely. The sports crowd. And that's what you see. You see, people in baseball hats and football. It was back in the early days. It was more a very elite little artsy crowd that went to see would be reciting Shakespeare under a shady tree, and people would sit there and watch.
And the stages were not mic'd. So as far as you could project, that was your crowd. And then when I first joined, there was also more adherence to the historical reenactment of it all. There were some anachronisms that were broken that you could sort of play the line of inferring something that was more modern. But I remember worrying about whether I was wearing the right costume, and I would have a costumer tell me, oh, I love your costume because it's accurate, or then they would tell people that you couldn't wear that because it was inaccurate, right down to even the colors.
Right. Mustn't wear purple.
Mustn't wear purple. And if you did...
Unless you're the king.
Or queen, right.
Or king or queen, yeah. Right? And then I remember, always... I remember, this is just a sort of a sweet memory. Lloyd told me that when he first started affairs, there wasn't a salt shaker at the corn. When you got the corn, there'd be a burlap sack with salt in it, and you would just shake it over the corn.
Hanging from twine, dangling, and you just shake it, and it would act like a salt shaker, and you get salt on your corn or whatever.
Yeah,
burlap.
Burlap. Everything was covered in burlap.
And
burlap was absolutely.
And I also remember when the pickles started to be sold, that there'd be a pickle vendor. All things that you see a lot now. With pickle vendor, that's kind of funny to mention, but I remember when you first started to see pickles, and there was some food that you'd never see. It was more limited. Yeah, the artists were first generation artists selling their wares, so in the campground there weren't so many people living because there weren't people working for people. There wasn't a whole...
Because the crafters were local producers mostly?
Either they were local or they were traveling with their wares and still selling their wares.
I see.
As the craft grew older, I have to say not a lot of younger crafters have come in, fill their spots. But what the elder crafters did is they would get off the road and hire someone then to manage their booths on the road. So it got to be more people selling product that they might not have made with their own hands. And
right.
Both either, buy it wholesale, then sell it retail to
right.
So people who make their own things, but luckily they can hire someone to go out and sell it.
Right. They've been on the road for 20 years and they're tired.
Or 40.
So then they bring, or 40 years.
Yeah, 40 years. And
like
so you
me.
can...
The booth managers become kind of part of the middle class of the Renaissance community.
Right.
Authority and power and responsibility.
And then perhaps be inspired to... There's plenty of artists now that have been inspired to make their own art and open their own booths if they can, or take over for that artist, learn the craft and take over.
Yeah, and I think that's an opportunity that more people should take advantage of on the Renaissance circuit, is learning a craft from a master craftsperson on the road. I learned how to make my own shoes. I learned how to make clown shoes by going and learning the craft of making shoes from a craftsperson at a Renaissance festival. There's all kinds of opportunities like that that I think more people should be taking advantage of. What I love about Renaissance festivals is the opportunity to be in a community of other artists. And
absolutely, yes.
And one of the best opportunities that I took advantage of was I learned how to make my own clown slap shoes. I started out as a white-faced mime, like I said at the beginning, And
So when you say slap shoe, what does that mean? Is that
Well,
is that a specific clown thing?
well, a slap shoe is when you walk, it goes slap, 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 because
Ah,
they're
okay, of
big,
course.
giant shoes. You know, the big,
like
the
clowns
big,
wear. Yeah.
and I started out as a white-faced mime back in the '70s, but then I was inspired to become a red-nosed clown, and I was in New York, and I had custom made a leather clown nose, made in the same exact technique as the old Commedia dell'arte masks were made in Italy in the Middle Ages.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was this. So I wanted to build this character around this red nose, and I thought, well, if I have a red nose, I need to have slap shoes. And so I started researching Renaissance costuming, and I saw that Germans had what was called a German duckbill, which is, rather than the Italian pointy medieval shoes, it looked like a clown shoe.
Instead of going long, they went wide.
Really wide, like a duck, like a duck's foot.
Yeah.
And I had to have that, and I had just ordered a pair of moccasins from a man named Doug Prince, who was the caretaker at the Minnesota Renaissance Festival year round. He lived there, you know, and cared for the festival grounds throughout the cold winter, the deep, dark, cold winter in Minnesota. And I had ordered a pair of moccasins, and I wanted to change my order to
duckbills,
to German duckbill clown shoes, Renaissance clown shoes. So I literally drove out to the Renaissance Festival, walked through the knee-high snow, and knocked on Doug's door.
The freezing north.
and he, sure enough, he opened the door. And I said hi, and I said I want to change my order from moccasins to clown shoes, Renaissance clown shoes. And he gave me this deadpan look after I explained the whole thing, and he looked at me and he said, I'm not going to do that, but I'll teach you how you can do that. And so I would take these pilgrimages out to the Renaissance Festival in the middle of the wintertime, and he brought me step by step, and he taught me how to make Renaissance slap shoes through the winter. And by that next season, I had built them, and it kind of transformed my whole character and my approach to the theater. It was a whole next level for me at Renaissance Festival. It just brought me to that next level, that authenticity level.
And they're really handsome, and you've made me a pair, and you've made us both several pairs. I have a good addendum. Were you done with talking about this?
Yeah, I
okay.
told my story.
So we have these slap shoes. They're rounded. They look like a clown's version of wingtips. And so I've watched my husband make these shoes, and they're beautiful. And so maybe around 20 years ago or something, we're in New York State. We're doing the Renaissance Festival. And we're doing they had another festival in town that they asked us to perform at as a promotion. And it was at this park that was downtown. We were supposed to go on before the bands, like 3:00 or 3:30 or something like that. And so we have our Renaissance costumes on. We were clowns at the time. We do a different kind of show now that's called the Wacky Chicken Show, but we were dressed as red-nosed clowns. We have our clown shoes on, and we do the promotion. We do our show, blah, blah, blah. And then it's starting to get towards dinner time, and the van's parked on the street near the park. We take off our slap shoes because Lloyd can't drive. Neither one of us could drive with a wide shoe. Right. So you take off your shoes, but you stay in your costume, then we drive back to the fair. Well, Lloyd takes his shoes off outside the side of the van and forgets them on the sidewalk.
No.
Yes.
Oh.
And so we're driving back, 2 minutes down the road, and I said, Lloyd, your shoes, where are they? It's like, oh my gosh, we forgot them. So we drive back, but at this point, it's getting to be later.
And there's 10,000 people in the park.
Starting to come. So he says, oh, we're never going to find them. Let's go home. I said, no, we're finding them because he sewed them.
Yeah.
He sewed them,
Yeah.
right? So I go and I'm asking everyone, have you seen, and I have my clown shoes in my hand. Have you seen these shoes? Yeah. Have you seen these shoes? Have you seen any of these shoes? And I'm going round and round, and there's more and more people. And then the band's warming up. So then I go to the MC and I say to the MC, who's a radio DJ, and I say, these shoes, have you seen these shoes? Could you make an announcement, please, to find these shoes? He says, okay, but this is what he does. He lifts up and he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, the name of the festival is called Harbor Fest. And he says, "Be the king or queen of Harborfest if you could find the matching pair to these shoes." And right then and there, this man yells, "Oh, God, I'm the king!" And he shows the clown shoes. And that's how he got them back.
And he was king of Harborfest.
He was king of Harborfest.
New York.
And he goes up
He
to the
didn't
stage.
wait for his crown either.
No, he just slapped him.
Slapped the shoes on the stage, and he turned to his buddies with his fists in the air. He didn't need any certificate, no crown.
No.
He walked around the rest of that day. He was the king of Harborfest. And I had my shoes back. And
I was so
that
determined.
was amazing.
If you were ever king of Harborfest, you want to tell your side of the story.
We still feel that you were king because you helped us get those shoes back. Yeah, that was funny. Really crazy.
That was funny.
So we still wear big shoes like
that.
A
man walked through the Minnesota winter every week for months to make those shoes.
That's true. That's true.
And now our show has morphed into the Wacky Chicken Show, and our shoes look like chicken feet. And Lloyd made those too.
And I made a pair of shoes, oversized clown type shoes, except they have the toes like a bird.
And we each
like
have
a
a
chicken.
pair.
And so it's like
so there's a whole evolutionary progress.
Oh yes.
To your clown shoes.
Yes.
What does a white-faced mime wear on his feet?
Oh, I just wore little gymnastic slippers. That's all.
So your footwear.
Because I started out as a gymnast, and so yeah, my footwear went from gymnastic shoes to clown shoes to chicken feet shoes.
Well, what's next? What's next in the evolutionary progression?
Well, I'm back down to clowns, but I'd like to share a story that includes you.
Oh, please do.
And the chicken characters that we do. It was you and Doug Muma's first year in Arizona, and you were trying out a brand new show, The Wyld Men Show.
Right.
And
we had no idea what we were doing.
And
we had ideas, but
you had a lot of ideas. You had a lot of ideas. But I offered my services as a director.
Thank God. Thank you.
And it was an extraordinary adventure. And I really have to say I was really caught up in that whole wild man spirit and being part of that team, of being part of the wild man team. And it was right after it was on the heels of the Robert Bly men's movement, inspired by Robert Bly's book Iron John, which is the story of the wild man. And so so it's like food for me working with you on the Wyld Man Show. And I'm at one point I remember hanging with you in your trailer and Doug in your trailer specifically at the end of the row there at Cannery Row. And I was thinking, okay, how is this? How can I take all this energy that I'm getting from this experience, and how can I find an inspiration in my work? Because I was kind of proud that I was kind of the more eccentric act, and then I'm directing something that
even weirder
than I did.
If it's possible,
I'm like, how can I take this as this nutrition, this food I'm getting, and find an inspiration in my own personal work? And I decided, I just read this story, this origin, very, very obscure origin story of the magician Merlin. And it's the story of Merlin as the wild man. I don't know if it was a Taliesin poem, but it's an old Celtic legend of the Summer King, who the Summer King, in the spring you're given, like the Bean King, however you're selected, you find a bean in a cake, whatever it is, and you are the king. You're the king now. You're the king.
Shoe king.
And like the king of Harborfest. And it's great and everything. You have a great summer, but then the story goes that this king, the Summer King, is on his way to his autumn wedding with his bride. But the autumn wedding is him and his bride being sacrificed.
The grain being sacrificed. John Barleycorn.
Exactly. It was human sacrifice. And this Merlin origin, this primordial Merlin, the story goes that he takes off his antlers. He was like Cernunnos, the god, the Celtic god.
Celtic god, yeah.
And he took off the antlers from his head. He threw them on the ground. He turned to the woman that he was walking with. And he says, "You marry who you will, but I will not participate." And he walked away into the woods, and he ended up talking to the animals and becoming a wild man, recluse in the woods. And Merlin is actually the name of a bird,
Right?
The Merlin bird, which is like a falcon or a hawk of some
Yeah.
sort, a carrion bird. And so I thought, oh, I'll be that Merlin that walked away, but I won't get as far as the deep woods. I'll get as far as the chicken yard, and I will learn the language of the chicken. And so then instead of antlers on my head, I wore the cock's comb. And that's where the
Right.
chicken came from. It was my interpretation of the wild man.
And now you're the rooster and I'm the hen.
Yes.
I have fond memories of taking notes backstage from you as we're developing our show, sitting there taking notes from a chicken.
Oh yeah, I kept on directing you after the year after, and I came to the show dressed as a chicken. Yes, and I had my notebook, and I'd be writing there. I think at some point you would even acknowledge and our chicken director or something.
Yeah,
like that. I think that was right after Volgamut came in or something like that. There was that was a great show. Set Sail for Adventure.
We had a show called Set Sail for Adventure, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I marvel at is this whole idea that we're able to perform outside so adeptly.
Yes.
Yes,
I
it's
agree.
being outside in the elements, and I was trying to think of a story that adapts to the whole. And there's so many that we have about being outside, thunder and rain, or
Well, how about the one where we we improvised with God?
well, yeah.
We were. That's what it was. That's what it was.
That's all we ever do, really.
No, we
I had
were.
a different story, but you go ahead. You tell that one.
We were at Scarborough Fair on
Yes.
the Gypsy stage.
Yes.
And it was, and you could see that it was springtime in Texas, and it's always major
Lots of
storms.
rainstorms.
A lot of storms
Thunder,
go through
tornadoes.
the festival.
Yeah.
We call it Tornado Alley there, and we're on stage, and there's a wall of storm. Black clouds are coming towards us, and we're seeing it coming, but it's still blue sky above us, but you see the storm coming. And we're in our show, and I do a bit where I take my hat off and I put it on an audience member's head, and I balance something on my chin, and I take my hat off back, and before I put it back on my head, I look in it and I see there's bugs from
And we
the
both
guy.
make believe that
and
we
we both
see
look at the bugs,
headlights,
and then
yeah.
I shake it out, and Rosie stomps the bug with her big clown shoe. Boom. And just as she stomps on the stage to kill that bug, a slow rolling thunder begins. It sounds like it's miles away, but it's from that black cloud, and the thunder gets bigger and louder and bigger and closer. And we're improvising now with God, and we're both looking down at where Rosie stamped on the stage, and we're slowly stepping away from the spot,
Like as if I activated
and
it.
then looking up at the whole heavens roaring its anger at us, and until it's just crashing like it's the like Shakespeare's Tempest, and we get down on our hands and knees and we're bowing to the thunder god. And it was one of the most unique improvisational experiences I've ever had.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the elements. People who don't perform outside perhaps have their own versions of stories, but a similar story from that fair, but it's not about weather. But I have a basket with a prop in it, which are these Australian cowbells, an octave of cowbells, and I kept them backstage in the gypsy wagon that they provided for us for our props. During the week, some mice decided that they would move into the basket and make it their nest. Well, what you need to know is that I can be quite petrified of rodents.
Oh.
Yes. So we're in the middle of the show, and to this day, I always check those bells. I always make sure there's nothing living in them, because that day, it was my turn to go out and do a solo, and I go, happily clowny, little happy clown, takes the bells out in front of a whole audience of people, and when I pick up the bell, out jumps a mouse onto the table, and I had to really keep it together. Inside I was thinking, mouse, and my outside was, there's a mouse, and it jumps onto the table and then kind of crawls off of it. And then I go backstage and, I look at my audience like, everything's under control, and I go back and I'm like, Lloyd, there's a mouse on stage! I'm going to go crazy! And then, come out and act all calm, and people thought it was a trained mouse.
Yeah, I come out and I take my duck call, my goose call, and I kind of honk, 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 honk at the remaining mouse that's still scurrying around on her bell basket.
Family of mice.
And of course, Rosie is panicking, and I'm like just and I finally. The mouse is running around on the table, and then it finally runs off the table and runs off the stage, to the audience's applause, like it was a trained mouse.
Bravo!
And I walk off the stage in victory, and Rosie finally does her piece, and it was fine, I think.
But to this day, even last weekend, I'm backstage and I look at those bells, and I think, please, no mice, please, no mice.
I had made this quilted pad that padded the mice so it wouldn't go clunk on the table, and it had dug in and made a nest.
Oh, please!
And they were little
It's
babies.
Oh yes, the babies. That's always the hardest part of the mouse infestation.
Well, that can't end there.
Acting with nature. My goodness.
And weather still happens. You see.
Yeah. We had a cloud of bees come visit us at the mud pit in Arizona one year. They were not the dreaded killer bees, thank goodness. They were just normal honeybees. Their hive had divided or whatever they do, and they're on the move. And they moved into the wall of our backstage area there. First thing in the morning, we walk out, and there is a beehive where there was no beehive before, under the eaves in the wall of our shower house. And the bees are actively circulating on stage, picking up water from the mud pit and the water effect there, and then feeding the hive. And so there's an active bucket brigade of bees feeding and cloud in a cloud. And we call up the management, and they get a hold of a beekeeper who's going to come at some point. And we're waiting, and 11:15 rolls along. That's our show time. And neither Doug and I are allergic to bees, nor particularly freaked out by them.
Yeah.
I've worked around insects, bees. I don't feel that they're aggressive. I'm not worried about that. And so we agreed we're just going to go on and work with the bees.
Oh dear.
And the audience, of course, can see that there is a cloud of insects around the mud pit all through the show. And we're going out, and we're taking things down a notch. We're not doing all of our we do all of our violence and action really occurs in slow motion. So we have that advantage when we're about to go into sort of like really anything that would be otherwise sudden and violent and maybe, provocative of the bees, we slow down. So we have that advantage. And there's a point in the show where after we've gone through quite a bit of these kinds of staged violent acts with no incident, a piece of a loop of rope gets hooked around my foot intentionally. This is part of the show, and this rope goes into the mud, and it pulls me into the mud pit, and I disappear. That's the gag.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a moment of surprise that I must act when I think that I'm victorious and have dispensed with the wild man. And here I am as Dr. Quinier's lunch, the victor. Civilized man has won. I'm at the peak of success, and then I discover this loop around my ankle, and it then pulls me to my demise. Well, the moment that I, as an actor, acted fear, shock, and surprise, a bee stung me dead center behind my heart. On my spine.
Oh, man.
It's terrible.
I convinced the bees that I was frightened or whatever that is we put into the air, the adrenaline.
Yeah, of course.
And it stung me.
So I have successfully acted before insects and convinced them of whatever. Of my
right, because
fear.
you don't want to show fear, like when you're in nature with a bear or a mountain lion or I guess a swarm of bees. Don't show fear.
Do not act fear.
Even if it's just acting on stage. Fear. Wow, that's funny. That's a funny story.
So although it was uncomfortable at the time, I marked that as a success.
No, that's a success as an actor. You're very good. You emoted true belief of fear. So a bee would sting you. That's something to be proud of.
Thank you.
Yeah, bee stings are one of those things. Mice, bee stings, weather.
Yeah, was it?
Slippery stages.
Were we on a stage and a bee stung you or something?
It stung Gabriel, our son. He was around 5, and he happily came trotting down the middle of the aisle to watch us in Minnesota with his babysitter. And he sits down all happy to watch Mom and Dad do their show. And I'm in the middle of the show, and I see the bee land on his nose and sting him. And you could just see him, you do that sort of silent, I've been stung by a bee thing. And he does that. And I just look at the babysitter, so sweet. And she had to take him away. I couldn't do anything about it, but I'll never forget that. Watching my kid get stung and not being able to really do anything. But our babysitter was fantastic, and she took care of him.
That's good.
Right? But,
yeah.
Right?
But it is funny. It's like, of course you couldn't do anything. You were on stage.
Right.
There's a wall there that I can't cross. Right?
I'm not in charge of that kid getting stung.
Oh, that's crazy.
Hey, I'd like to thank Rosie Cole and Lloyd Brant for joining me here today as we talk about old times and exciting times at Renaissance festivals. I'm Jonathan Crocker of the Wyld Men and Theatre in the Ground mud shows at the Ohio Renaissance Festival, and the Wyld Men is at the Arizona Renaissance Festival, of course. You can find me on Facebook under the Wyld Men or Theatre in the Ground, and we are moremud.com and thewildmen.com.
And Jonathan, it's been great being part of this podcast and being part of this conversation. I'm Lloyd Brant, as I said at the beginnings, half of Theatre of Fools. You can contact us at theatreoffools.com, theater with an R-E, or email us at theatreoffools@gmail.com.
I'd like to thank Jonathan, too. It's been great speaking with you and reminiscing about all of our time on the Renaissance Festival circuit. I'm Rosie Cole, based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, with Lloyd Brant. We also have another company called the Emergency Clown Nose, and you can purchase emergency clown noses all around the country. It's our philosophy distilled in a bottle called the Emergency Clown Nose. Never leave home without it.
I've got mine.
Yay!
It's a great stocking stuffer.
Yes. It's always a pleasure. Come see us at Ren Fairs around the country, and hopefully we'll laugh together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.